Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. My name is Ryan Masterson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Green Hat Web Solutions. And today we are going to be talking about how to prepare images to make your website faster. And we are doing a series of e-commerce workshops in partnership with the Denver Economic Opportunity and Development, as well as the Commons on Champa. And I would like to introduce to you, first I'll introduce Carrie Singer from the Commons on Champa. Carrie, go ahead and tell us about yourself. Oh, are you on mute?
Sorry about that.
Yep.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carrie Singer. Hopefully you can all hear me now. I'm with Denver Economic Development and Opportunity, a local government agency. And I'm also a part of the Commons on Champa. And prior to COVID, we hosted innumerable workshops out of the Commons on Champa, particularly with Green Hat Web Solutions. So they're a great power partner of ours. I just want to give a short plug for the Commons on Champa. I'll post information in the chat, but essentially the Commons was launched to be a public space for entrepreneurs. Right now, the physical space continues to be closed to the public, but we offer virtual business advising, in addition to a wide array of virtual workshops and business accelerator incubator programs that, again, continue to be offered, but are at this time virtual. So I will post information about that in the chat. And then I'll give a short plug for the city agency that Michael and I work for, which is Denver Economic Development and Opportunity. If you are a Denver-based business or located here in the metro region, there are a host of programs that you may be able to take advantage of, and those include small business lending, tax credit programs, certifications for doing work with Denver, and then workforce development related programs if your company is looking to hire employees. So that's a little bit about me and the entities that I'm affiliated with. And as I mentioned, I'll post this information in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Carrie. And a person who is also helping me with this series of webinars is Michael Bevis. Michael, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks again, Ryan, for putting these on and having me here. So my name is Michael Bevis. I work with Carrie Singer. She did a great job of explaining what our office does and how we can help. But I also find home out of the Commons on Champa in a pre-COVID world. And we're here just to help support businesses at all stages of your journey. So excited to have you all here. And we're here as a resource for you. I'll put my contact information in the chat as well.
Great. Thank you, Michael. So I can just tell you, as a business owner in Denver, I have used the services of the Commons on Champa and the Denver Economic Opportunity and Development, and it is great. I highly recommend it. And I don't stop using it. We've been in business now for over 10 years, and I still have questions that come up that I ask them. And so they're a very valuable resource. I invite everyone here to consider using them. Just even if you have just a simple question on anything business related. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to make your images fast, because if there is one of the major things that slows down a website are your images. And so that's why this webinar here is so critical. This is actually a subject that I really like. I am from the art industry as well, so working with images is something that I'm really kind of passionate about. And because this is a small group here, this is going to be very interactive. As I go, you can interrupt me and ask questions, or you can write your questions in the chat. And I really do welcome questions. This is meant to be like a discussion. I'm going to lead with some slides, but when you have a question, just jump in and we can have a discussion about it. Okay, so the reason why we're doing this, first of all, is because one of our missions here at Green Hat is to provide free webinars and events to the community in order to help the businesses grow. For me, it's a way to meet people and to just make connections, and it's a way to give back. I feel really good about doing this. We're not doing this here. We're not getting paid for doing this. We host this meetup as a free service to the community. It's our way to give back. And so, thank you for being here today, because it's real nice. This is just a real fun opportunity for all of us here. All right, so today we're going to be talking about which image formats to use. This is the first thing we're going to be talking about. Right now, we have a few options available to us. We have JPEGs, PNGs, and GIFs. Those are the traditional image formats that have been widely supported. They are widely supported and have been widely supported by all browsers for a long time now. So you don't have to worry about support for them. However, you do have to worry about the size of them and which one is appropriate for which situation. And that's what we're going to be talking a lot about today. Which format is appropriate for which situation? And we also have some newcomers, relatively newcomers to the field as well. Those are JPEG 2000, JPEG XR, WebP or Webby, and SVG. And so these are some newer formats. Not all of these are supported by all browsers, but the ones that are, or it can be really good to use some of these, because these can be even more advanced images in regards to the compression. So in other words, you can have a bigger image with more complexity that has a smaller file size. And it's just so important because, again, one thing that I have to really emphasize here is that images are one of the biggest things that slow down your website. It's not the number of plugins. Some people think, I have like 40 plugins in my WordPress site, and I got to reduce that down to 30. And I mean, if the plugins are really well developed, that the difference between like 30 and 40 is minimal. I mean, if the plugin is a poorly developed plugin, and there are times where it can add extra bloat, yes. But also too, the quantity of text that you have on your page, that makes a minuscule difference to the load time. The difference between an image and text is that it just takes so much more bits, so much more space, file size space to have an image, to project an image, to create an image, than it does to create text. So that's why this webinar here is so important, because it's images. I would say the second thing too that makes a really big difference in your speed of your website is your hosting environment. You do want a fast hosting environment. So for example, you should stay away from economy hosting providers like the cheapest plan on GoDaddy or the cheapest plan on Bluehost or something like that. Instead, what we would recommend is WordPress optimized hosting if you're doing a WordPress site, such as like WP Engine or SiteGround. And if you're using Shopify, you don't even have to worry about that, because Shopify takes care of that for you. They take care of the hosting for you. And then so for example, if you have a Shopify site and you're doing e-commerce, that's one thing you just don't have to worry about. I would say then the thing that you do need to worry about is image sizes. And so that's what we're talking about here today. Okay, so first we'll start with JPEGs. So JPEGs are very widely supported. In fact, it's arguably the most popular image format out there. It's compatible with like many image processing applications beyond just web browsers. It's very common. Like, if you're going to have like a printed on a t-shirt, sometimes they accept JPEGs too and all that. So they can be reduced and compressed. So that's an advantage for them. A JPEG is also very good for many colors, and especially gradients too. As you see in this picture here, this is a really good example here on the right, because there's gradients. You have pinks near the horizon, and whites and grays and blues. and like you have yellows and greens kind of down below, all in like a gradient style. This is a very good case for a JPEG. So photographs are like a great thing to be, or usually if you take a photograph, if you're looking, or if you get like a photograph from like a stock site, a JPEG is a good option for that because it just supports gradients so well, which is common to photographs. So some of the disadvantages of a JPEG is that after you compress it, you will start to lose some quality. And you do have a choice though of compression. You can, the rate that you compress an image is definitely within your control. And so you do have some options to that. I think that if you're going to use JPEG for your website, maybe, and you're working in Photoshop, I would say do not save your images at or export your images at 100% quality. I don't recommend that. I don't recommend that because the human eye can't perceive really the difference in a JPEG usually. Now, there might be exceptions, usually between like 100%. I'll even go as far down as 80%. So, I mean, maybe you might start to perceive like a little JPEG pixelation at 80%. But I think that that's so minor that it's kind of your users won't really notice that unless someone's really looking for it. So if I'm in Photoshop and I'm exporting a JPEG, I will export, when I'm exporting for the web, that is, I will export around 80%, maybe even a little lower, and you can play with it. Some images, you can actually even go down even lower. It's not necessary to export as a 100%. That's just, you're saving too much data that's not making an impact on the quality of the image at that point. Another disadvantage of a JPEG is it does not support layers in it. Like if you save as a JPEG, it's a flat file. So if you're working with Photoshop, you should keep your layers separate if you're kind of making a collage and building something. In fact, speaking of Photoshop here, I'll just mention real quick again, because I just love this subject of Photoshop and I love images and all that stuff. So let me make one little side note about Photoshop here. When you are saving images for the web, like if you get like a stock photo, I recommend that you save a separate Photoshop file of that, and then you don't change that one so that you lose your original. You always want to stay with the original. If you're working in Photoshop, one thing you can do is you can convert it to a smart object so that no matter how you resize it, the original image is kind of embedded as a separate file in there. It's very good. So that way, if you ever need to go back and change the size of it, you can at a later time. Because the reason why this is important, this is another tip about using JPEGs. Once you resize a JPEG, never, when possible, make it bigger again. Because so you can, if you have like a really big JPEG image, like again, like if you get it from a stock site, usually they come plenty big, or even just a new camera these days too. Right off the camera, they're way bigger than what you need on the web. So when you resize it for the web, you're making it smaller. And when you make it smaller and you save it, you're losing a lot of data. If for whatever reason you have to make it bigger again, don't resize the JPEG that you made smaller, because that data is lost. When you make it bigger again, it's going to look distorted. Instead, you need to go back to the original one to make it smaller. So another disadvantage of JPEGs is they're heavier than Webbies or WebP files. So again, if you're using a great time to use JPEG though is for photographs, still images, and something with mini gradients, and when you're avoiding sharp lines or text. And I'm going to get into that next. So the next one here is a PNG. A PNG is great for sharp lines like this. Like this example here is a very good example of a PNG. It's very sharp lines and with very distinct boundaries, and there's no gradients on this. So this is a great case for PNG file. A PNG file you can save as a lossless compression. In other words, you don't lose the quality when you save it. And it can provide like a near pixel perfect match from the original one. And it supports transparency, which is really good. So that's an important thing. If you're creating like a logo for your website, you want to use a PNG, you should save the file as a PNG. So if you're taking a picture of your product like that you're going to sell on your e-commerce site, save that or use that as a JPEG on your website. But your logo should be a PNG. JPEGs do not support transparencies, but PNGs do support transparencies. And the thing that makes PNGs, or why that's so important, is because if you have one PNG file, you can put it up against any background like in your header. Like if your header is like perfectly white, well, that's great. Or if it's a shade of gray, that's fine too. Or if it's a red color, like this same black PNG image would work in all the cases. If you tried to save this as a JPEG, it would look bad. The reason is because you would automatically get like a white background here because transparency is not supported. So when you put that in your header that maybe, let's say, is red, you're going to see a white square and then your black logo in there. So logos, PNGs are for logos, JPEGs are for photographs, generally speaking. There might be exceptions, and we can talk about some of that. The disadvantage, in fact, actually, that's actually what I want to talk about next. The disadvantage maybe of a PNG is that they can be heavier than JPEGs if there's lots of colors. And so this is a case, if you like this image right here, I can just, from my experience, I can just tell you absolutely make it a PNG. Don't make it a JPEG. It's going to be smaller as a PNG. But if you do have like a kind of a line art, but that has lots of colors in it, or even maybe there's a gradient in the logo itself. Like let's say, for example, it started out kind of blue down here at the bottom of the light bulb, and it kind of had a gradient that went up to green, but it still had sharp edges right here, as this one does. Then you really need to test. It gets to a point where you need to just export a JPEG and then export a PNG and see which one is appropriate for you, or which one has the smaller file size while still looking great. Another disadvantage may be that it doesn't support CMYK, but for most of us here, or for all of us here, I believe, as we're preparing this for the web, CMYK is not important because CMYK is for print usually, and RGB is what we use in web development. So I think that when you should use it, definitely for logos, and when you have something with or icons are also really good with PNG, and definitely when you need transparency. So let me pause real quick. Does anyone have any questions between JPEGs and PNGs? Okay, I will go on. The next format I'll talk about is a GIF. The cool thing about a GIF is that it can have animation, such as this. JPEGs and PNGs do not do animation. So GIFs have become, it's kind of funny actually. I've been in this industry for 20 years now. And in the beginning of my experience here, the two options really were JPEGs and GIFs. That was like the standard. You use like GIFs maybe for logos and then JPEGs for pictures, and PNGs came later, or at least they became popular later. And so then GIFs decreased in popularity. The biggest reason why they decreased in popularity is because GIFs are limited to only 256 colors. Now, the important thing about that, it can be any 256 colors you want, but nonetheless, it's a limit of 256 colors. So what I mean by that is you could have, if you had like a picture that was just a gradient of a mix between like some reds and some oranges and no other colors, when you exported your image as a GIF, all 256 colors would be on that scale, on that spectrum of between red and orange, which might look nice. But for a GIF, as soon as you start adding extra colors in there, like, some greens, some blues and all that, some blacks and grayscales. Then all of a sudden you're maxing out that 256 color palette really quickly. Then then they show their weakness quickly. So because of that, GIFs really started dropping in popularity. So again, in the beginning, it was GIFs and JPEGs, very popular, but then GIFs started really becoming, or as PNGs were becoming the overtaking GIFs, PNGs were becoming really popular. Now, the funny thing though about this, I think, is that GIFs have seen a resurgence recently because of the social media apps like WhatsApp and like Twitter, and where you can actually share GIFs because they're animated. And so all of a sudden GIFs are becoming popular again. It's really interesting to me as being in this industry for so long. So if you need to make an animation GIF that needs to be supported by many different social media platforms such as WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, as other things that support animated or just GIFs like that, and a GIF might be a good choice for you. Surprisingly, I'm surprised to say that. Otherwise, though, for your website, I don't recommend using a GIF, except for the only exception if you need to do some animation like a spinner. You know how like sometimes when you go to a web page and it's loading and you see a little spinner? Well, usually what that is, it's technically that thing that's spinning is technically not spinning per se. It's actually just an animated GIF that is showing the dot at certain portions of the image. And then so when the GIF is running, it gives the illusion that it's spinning. That's what that is. It's usually an animated GIF. And that may be a good place to use a GIF. But I would not use one for your logo because in general, a PNG will support more colors and provide a better quality at a lower file size than a GIF. Okay, so now we are going to talk about some next gen images here. All right, the JPEG 2000. So the JPEG 2000 is definitely better than a JPEG, but it is only supported by Safari, the browser. So only the Mac users will benefit from it, or other people using Safari. I guess Windows users use Safari. Actually, I should put the caveat that I haven't checked recently for which browsers support this. To be honest, I haven't checked actually in a few months. So if any of you would like to update me on the support for JPEG 2000, please feel free to do so. But last I checked, it was only supported by Safari. It's better. The JPEG 2000 is a better quality photo, or it's a better file type than a normal JPEG. But the disadvantage is that it has a very limited support use. And so, this is kind of something where it was created at first because it was just, they realized that it was it's more efficient on the computer. It requires less CPU power. It requires less bandwidth to load. And so it's really good. It also preserves some metadata, and it also offers accessibility and scalability that JPEGs don't provide. So there's a lot of great things about JPEG 2000, but there's also the big things that you have to be careful about which browsers can use that. And we're going to see that with some of these other ones too. The JPEG XR it's closely related to the JPEG 2000. It's a less intense application. And this is also a superior image format than the JPEG. But like the JPEG 2000, it also has limited browser support. So in this particular case, this one is supported by Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, and related browsers to that. So it's a really good JPEG for the Microsoft side of the browsers. And it has great support of HDR imagery. And then the Webby. Okay, the Webby, which is, I know it's kind of pronounced kind of weird, but Webby, like that, or WebP. So it is a file type that is becoming perhaps the most popular out of all of these alternative and next gen image formats. So it is 25% smaller than optimized PNGs and JPEGs, and it supports animation like a GIF. By the way, again, just to repeat, the JPEGs and PNGs do not support animation, but Webbies do. And they're easy to convert. It's easy to convert JPEGs and PNGs into Webby, and they're smaller. They're 25% smaller. And you can save them in a lossless format, which means that you're compressing the pixels, the code, but you're not actually losing any pixel information or vector information or anything like that. The image compression you can choose, and so it's really good. So, but like all these next gen formats, there will be some maybe conflicts or lack of support. Last I checked, Safari was not supporting Webby. The Webby, but Google, Chrome, and related browsers do support Webby, and it's really good. There's also tools out there too, like WebP-converter.com, which is a great tool. So what you can do if you want to use a Webby file on your website, you can go ahead, and if you're using them in Photoshop, if you're creating your images in Photoshop, you can export them as a PNG or JPEG as you would normally, and then you can convert them into this converter, which will decrease the file size and make that file smaller while still keeping the image quality great. So one thing that you could do to work around this problem here with like these different image formats here, if you are, there are several ways to do it. If you're an advanced developer, you could actually write your code to display the Webby only in Chrome browsers, the JPEG only in Microsoft related browsers, the JPEG XR I meant to say, and the JPEG 2000 in Safari related browsers. You can do that. You can even write code to do that. But obviously that takes some greater development skills. The good news though, especially for WordPress users here, and Shopify, I don't know actually about Shopify. If any of you do, I would love for you to interrupt and tell me. But the good news about like WordPress is that you can install some plugins that will do that code for you. So then you can have a Webby and a JPEG in your website, and the plugin itself controls it. It writes the code for you. So it detects the browser. If the browser supports Webby, like Chrome, then it's gonna load the Webby file, and your website will load faster. But like if you're on a website that doesn't support it, the plugin will automatically produce code that will make the browser not load the Webby and load the JPEG instead, so that you still see it. So there are some really good plugins out there that do that, and that might be becoming even more popular. Shopify may even have an option like that as well. Okay, so last thing for these alternative image formats that we're talking about here is SVG. SVG is really cool. SVG is a scalable vector graphic. So what's the difference between vectors and pixels? Well, as this image here shows, it's actually, okay, a vector is like, it's kind of, there's mathematical points. And then there are, like, for example, there's a point right here, and then this is saying like how much to curve it. Like this line that's coming out from the point is saying how much to curve it. And here's another point, and then this is how much to curve that as well. Like if I extended that to make it even bigger, it would literally change the curve of this S here. And I believe you can see my mouse to what I'm pointing to. Let me know if not. So if any of you have used Adobe Illustrator, you're very familiar with this concept about how you can you can grab these anchor points and you can extend them or retract them, and it changes. So you'll notice, for example, on this V here, there's no anchor points extending from there. It's because there's no angle. It's a sharp angle. But in this case, on the edges there are. The point is, what I'm getting at here is that you only need a few points, a little bit of information to create this graphic here. Whereas if you were saving this as a pixel based file, such as a JPEG or even PNG, it's going to say, okay, this pixel is white, this pixel is white, this pixel is white, this pixel is white, this pixel is red, this pixel is red, this pixel, I can't even say that. But basically it's saving every information about every single pixel that's on there. As a result, the file, that's why image files are so big. It's because every little pixel is stored. Now, in some of the traditional formats or next gen formats, that's changed. It's not necessarily saving every pixel, but if you're using like a JPEG or a GIF, yes, every single pixel is stored. So now the SVG though is not appropriate for a photograph. So because you can't really put these vector points on a photograph. So if you're taking a picture of your product, you still use a JPEG. Excuse me, if you're going to use but if you have a logo or an icon, maybe an SVG is the best way to go. So again, like the evolution of the images here is like way back in the day when I first started in this industry, GIFs were like the thing, or GIFs, you can call them that too. Then PNGs became more popular because they supported more color and they could have a lower file size and the better quality, but they were still kind of heavy compared to SVGs. Now all of a sudden SVGs are very light, very light. But again, they're only appropriate for logos and icons and line art and stuff like that. So another disadvantage maybe of SVG is there is limited browser support, but that is changing. More browsers are supporting SVG all the time. I need to actually update myself on the standard here of like which image files are available or supported in which browsers, because that is something that changes, but SVGs are great. Okay, do I have any questions on some of these alternative image formats?
Hey, Ryan, that's great run through. Yeah. And I've been really curious about all these new formats because they come up a lot when you do page speed tests and things for websites.
Yes.
And Google's like, you should be using these. And then you go to try to use them and it's like, oh, can't really do that realistically.
Yep.
But I'm curious about this SVG versus PNG, because you really emphasize PNG is good for logos and things like that. Would you say SVG is really probably in line to take over from that?
Yes, SVG is becoming more popular all the time. And I think, the problem with some of these other things like JPEG 2000, JPEG XR is that they unfortunately, really unfortunately, they've kind of got locked into this kind of, the owner of them, like the maker is kind of, it's competitive because it's kind of, Internet Explorer or Edge, doesn't want to support Safari stuff, and or they kind of want they're trying to push their own advanced images, and that's why unfortunately it's been a mess. And in fact, actually, it's very possible that JPEG 2000s and JPEG XR will eventually just kind of go away. I do think because of Google's popularity, Webbies might survive, and it's very possible that will happen because Google is just so dominant in the area. But SVGs though, I don't experience that same sort of brand competition that I do with some of these other image formats. So that's what makes SVG different. So I do think that more and more browsers, the companies basically are saying, yeah, SVG is great. And they're not like so picky about supporting them as they might be some other competitors' image format. So yeah, if you're creating a logo, PNG is very safe. Like, you can't go wrong with PNG these days because it's super supported, so much so that you never have to worry about that. I mean, in regards to any modern web browser or any device, a PNG will be supported, no problem. So that's why I say it's very safe and you can do it. But SVGs for logos and icons are going to give you a smaller file size, and it's going to be great. So I would use SVGs when you can. Now, you can, just as I was saying, there are some plugins available for Webby where it can detect if a Webby is supported, then load that one. Otherwise, it loads a JPEG. You can actually also have the same thing for SVG graphics where you have some fallbacks. So if SVG is not supported, then it can display the PNG. Thank you for your question.
Ryan, do you have any, oh, sorry, Kurt, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask Ryan if you mentioned those plugins. Do you have the specific ones for the WordPress site that might be able to detect those browsers?
You know what? That's a good question. I at the end of this, if I have time, I actually will look for some, or otherwise too, send me an email and I can reply to you with ones that we use and recommend. So I'll do that.
Great.
And on that note, Ryan, would you recommend using the plugin, because you're sort of adding some weight to the website by adding another plugin?
Yeah, so
reduce the weight of the images.
Yeah, so actually, that's a really good question, I'm really glad you brought that up. I really do believe that some people estimate. They make too much about having too many plugins on the website. If a plugin is well written, and not all of them are, the difference that it makes in the loading time is minimal, very minimal, if the plugin is well written. And usually, and when I say well written, like, how do you know if it's well written or not? Well, I mean, if it's being updated regularly, that's a very good sign. Like, when you go to download a plugin, if you look to see like when the last update was, if it was just 2 weeks ago, that's good. That's a good sign. If it has high ratings, that's obviously a very good sign. If it has very high number of downloads and uses, that's also a really good sign. So I would say that the benefit of using SVG or Webby versus just like not using a plugin because you don't want to slow your site down, I would say that definitely use the plugin. You're going to get more savings by using the plugin and serving these next gen formats than by just not having a plugin at all. So.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, now here is something else we're going to talk about. So this is kind of the thing that honestly, like in my industry, I kind of shake my head about, because how things just continually to get more and more complex, and it just makes it harder for us web designers. So I totally have sympathy for all of you web designers out there trying to keep up with this, because like it changes so much and it just becomes more and more complex. And here's what I mean. Years ago, when you had your computer monitor, there was really just one pixel density available. It was 72. All the monitors out there were and even all the cell phones, all the monitors, laptops or desktop computers or even monitors, they were all 72 of a pixel density. And it made development for these so easy, because you just exported your images with 72 DPI. And it was nice, hey, one image or one image and it's done, and then you can move on to the next one. But things have changed now. Monitors and cell phones, so both, in other words, both like laptops, desktops, and cell phones have higher pixel density now, which means that 72 DPI images are no longer going to look as good on these devices. They're going to look a little blurry. You know, to be honest, actually, I mean, I'm kind of being sarcastic when I'm saying I'm shaking my head. You know, it does make it complex for us, the developers and designers, but yet it is a good thing too, because really a 72 DPI was not small enough. The human eye could notice it. In other words, as the monitors have an increased pixel density, it gets better quality. So for us, you know, for the user, for the users love it. The users love that these monitors are getting more and more pixel density. But for us designers, it does complicate our worlds. So what that means is basically like the number of pixels in a monitor has increased. Now, some of you may be familiar with like the Retina, Mac Retina first made that, or I don't know, I wouldn't, maybe not first, but it became really popular with the Retina displays. That was at when those started coming out, that's when this whole pixel density thing became really popular then, because they used a greater pixel density, which made their images look better. But the problem though, is that when you look at an old website that still just used a 72 DPI image, you could tell, it's kind of a blurry image. It would look different. And so the solution basically is that now you actually have to make different versions of your images for you, for the different pixel densities. I can give you another example too. Like, let's say you are, to keep it, let's say we're making a logo that is 200 pixels by 200 pixels. Like that's the way it's going to display. It's going to display on your screen 200 by 200. So and then like back in the day, you would export that as 72 DPI and it would look great. It would be 72 DPI and it would display 200 by 200. But now with if a monitor has a pixel density that is 2 times greater, so like an 150 DPI, you actually now, you need to, when you export that logo, you need to export it as 400 by 400. Even though it's going to display as 200 by 200, because it's doubling the amount of pixels in that photograph. So this example of code right here, what this is saying here is that there are fallbacks. So like, this is like an image tag. You guys might recognize this, you know, IMG, and then the SRC is the source. So that, you know, that's like the same as normal, you know, the IMG and source, you know, here's like the upload. It's like here's like the picture, or, you know, here's like your default picture. And that one might be like the 72 DPI one, you know, like the good old days. But then now there's this attribute that you can do for source set. And what that's doing is that's saying if the pixel density is 1 time display this image. If the pixel density is 2 times, display this image, 3 times, display this image. So like really good monitors or that have a very high pixel density, it's going to display this image. Now, one question might be, well, why not just save all of your images at this 4x size? The reason is because, unfortunately, for some people who aren't using such a high pixel density monitor, it's just more image than they need. It's just going to slow down your site, and they won't notice any difference. You know, yes, it is possible you could just serve them a huge image that would look great in all devices, but then you're sacrificing speed. So, you know, it's a problem. But the solution is this source set. Now, the good news for WordPress users, and maybe Shopify too, is that source set is now supported natively in WordPress. So what happens when you upload an image in WordPress, it's going to make several versions of that, and it will like, you don't even know it. Like, from your perspective, you upload an image, you see it in the media library, it's one image, you know, you don't even know it. You know, that's all it is. But really in the back end, what's going on is WordPress is making several copies of that image at different sizes. So it's going to make one at the full size, then maybe one at 1024, then maybe one at 768, then maybe a thumbnail, and you can actually control these. So literally on your web server, you actually, although you don't know it, you don't see it, but on your web server, you actually have now 4 different versions of this image. And then what happens is WordPress will supply this source set code, and it will use the appropriate image. Well, this is great news, because then basically the browser will use the appropriate image and not load an image that's larger than necessary. You can also, this source set also applies to width. You know, you can do it by pixel density, as this shows, or you can do it by width. And so in this particular example here, you can set like the breakpoints, you know, at 1,600 pixel or 1,006 pixels wide, display this image, but at 4,025 pixels wide, display this image. And this is really good. Meanwhile, there's always a fallback image. So if like these fails, or if you get like a browser that doesn't support source set at all, which these days is probably not going to be the case, but it always has a fallback. And there you go, like your original image. So like a fallback means that if a browser can't support, if it doesn't support this code, it's just going to ignore it and it's just going to load this. And so it's great. Okay, so this talks about like, you may be familiar with the testing tools. In fact, actually, I could have started with this slide first, to be honest, talking about, you know, how much images make an impact on a website and how you need to do that. Like these are 2 tools that you can use to test your performance. Google PageSpeed Insights and GTmetrix. Both of them can provide data for you on why your website is slower, what's slowing it down the most, and what you can do to improve that. And by the way, we'll send out a copy of these slides later as well via the email. And if you're on our email list, which you would be if you joined this webinar, unless you unsubscribed, you'll get this. So yeah, serve scaled images. What that means is you're serving images that, like in this particular case here, the reason why this got an F is because the image may have been like, for example, 1,000 by 1,000 pixels in its natural size, but its display size was only 400 by 400. And Google is saying, whoa, you know, wait a minute, that's really bad. Images already take up bandwidth. But if you're serving an image that's like 2.5 times bigger than it needs to be, then that's really a waste of bandwidth. And so it's going to score you low for that. Optimize images is a little bit different. Optimizing images is about, it's not about changing the size of the image. It's about changing how much data is needed in the file size to support your image. And so that's what I'm going to talk about next here. Okay, there are some image compression tools out there that are great, called ShortPixel, Kraken, and Image Optim. So this is something that fascinates me. I am actually shocked to say this, but Photoshop, again, like the last time I checked, can't compress images as well as these tools do. And it shocks me to say that because Photoshop is supposed to be an industry leader and, you know, like the go-to solution for all web designers out there and graphic designers. You know, Photoshop is supposed to be so great with photos, and yet it can't compress images as well as some of these tools do, at least the last time I checked. So what that means is your workflow should include use of these tools for ShortPixel, and Kraken and image, or one of these 3 tools you should include it in your workflow. So what I mean by that is you take your original photo either from the stock site or from your HDR camera, and it's going to be huge, you know, like 4,000 pixels or whatever. Then you're going to resize it in Photoshop or your other Photoshop or photo manipulating tool that you're using. You're going to resize it to the appropriate size it needs to be, let's say 600 pixels. And you're going to then export it at the compression that is low enough to keep the file size small, but high enough to keep the quality. It's gonna defer every type of image, particularly for JPEGs. I'm talking about here. For JPEGs, there is no one exact image compression percentage that you should use. Sometimes you can go as low as 60%, some maybe 50 even, depending on the type of image it is. Sometimes you need to do 80, maybe even 90, but I wouldn't, 90 is probably too much, but but you have to find that balance. You know, how far down can you go in compression where it makes it small without losing the quality? Then you export it. Then you run it through one of these compression tools like Short Pixel, Kraken, or Image Opt-in. And what these tools do is then they compress the file size even further. They don't change the size of the image, like the display size, but they change the file size. And so I'm going to show you a little example right here. Let's see here. Okay, so here, for example, is Kraken. Kraken.io/web interface. This is an image optimizer you can use. And you have some choices here. You could upload them, you can paste the URL in, and you can choose whether you want a lossy or lossless image, or export even gives you more options. A lossy image means that it's going to manipulate the appearance of the image, like, you know, some pixels. It's going to manipulate them to try to make it even more optimized. A lossless optimization is only going to optimize the code itself, like the backend code, something that you never ever see. So the image will look exactly the same. You can choose what you're doing. And so, for example, if I just take my image here and I drag it into here, the original, what it's doing is optimizing it for me. So this original image size was 304 kilobytes. It reduced this image size to just 89 kilobytes. So that's a savings. It saved 214 kilobytes, which is 70%. That's awesome. Basically, if I were serving this on the website, I mean, now all of a sudden, my website, this image is going to load more than twice as fast now. So then I just download this file here. And then, like, for example, I'll open it even here in this new tab here. This is it here. This is the optimized version. Still looks great. It looks great, and it's more than 2.5 or 2 times faster now. Now, here's the great news for WordPress developers. The great news is that there are plugins that support this, that support these. So, for example, all Short Pixel and Kraken, I don't know about Image Opt-in, but Short Pixel and Kraken have WordPress plugins available that when you install them, and if you sign up for like a plan, when you load an image into the media library, it automatically, behind the scenes, without you knowing about it, it goes to the Short Pixel or Kraken's compression tools online, compresses them, and then sends them back to your media library. So you have now just automatically compressed your images, and you didn't even know about it, and you didn't have to do any extra step. That's a great, great tool. So I highly recommend one of those 2 plugins for your WordPress site, Short Pixel or Kraken, to make your life easier. And there may be some other options. Actually, I think there is another option too. I need to update the slides too with that. So do I have any questions about that? All right, going on. Videos here. We're running out of time, but so I'll go real quickly. I want to just mention real quick about videos here. If you're streaming a video, or if you have a video on your website, you have a choice to either self-host it or to have it hosted by someone else. And one reason why you may want to self-host it is because you don't want to publish it on YouTube or Vimeo. And also, you may not want to avoid another HTTP request or domain lookup. And so it could make your website faster. But on the other hand, good reasons to use YouTube or Vimeo is they offer really good browser support and device compatibility, as well as great streaming options. What that means is, depending on the device, YouTube will detect what device you're on, what bandwidth you have available, and it's going to send the appropriate video to you accordingly. So if you're on like a low bandwidth and like a device that, or like a screen, small screen and all that, it's going to send you a smaller file type to stream. So it's great. That's one reason to use that. You should also use CDNs when appropriate or when available. A CDN stands for Content Delivery Network, and it allows you to save your images on other kind of edge servers around the globe, so that when people like in New York load your website, it's going to get it from the New York or something like that. I probably need to have like a separate webinar about videos and CDNs, but I do like Cloudflare a lot. It's they have a free plan that you could use, and they also have more advanced plans such as which you can pay. It's a pretty low cost for $20, and they will just help serve your images faster. And there are also some other tools out there too. We'll send these slides out so you can investigate these options. These will just kind of help serve. It's like a CDN. They will help serve those images faster across the globe to some of your users. This definitely gets into more kind of advanced things. So there's lots of layers of complexity that you can do for your images to make them fast. Here's a bunch of sources actually if you want to read more about the different types of next gen images, and also like how to use like Webby and stuff like that. These are some great links to read about that. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our webinar, and thank you very much. Are there any questions that I can answer? Okay, well, I really appreciate you coming and joining us. If you enjoyed this webinar, would you please write a review for us on Google or Yelp? This would be really cool for us. This would be like a great way to show your appreciation. If you enjoyed this webinar and if you got something out of it, you can write even again, part of our mission at Green Hat is to offer services and education for free to the community. It's our way to give back. And so if you're happy with this, and if you could kind of write a review on Google or Yelp, that would be greatly appreciated. Well, these links are in the chat. In addition to this, we will send an email follow-up with this video recording of this, as well as the slides. So basically, we want to equip you with everything that you need. And so if I don't have any questions, I think that I will wrap this up. We are doing these e-commerce webinars. We have more coming. We have the next one coming in 2 weeks at the same time. And I don't remember what the next one is. I'll have to look that up, but we will notify you in our meetup channel, and as well as the email in our email list. So thank you very much for coming out and participating.
Thanks, Ryan. It was really helpful.